Hello, everyone, and welcome back to People Jew Want to Know podcast and our Goy You Will Enjoy season. This episode is certainly a highlight for me, and I'm so excited to share it with you. Today, we are hearing from Arno Michaelis. Arno is a former white supremacist turned peace activist, author, and prominent voice in the global movement to counter violent extremism. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, he was a founding member of a racist skinhead organization, the lead singer of the hate metal band Centurion, and a reverend of the self-declared Church of the Creator, a violently anti-Semitic white separatist movement. Arno spent 7 years in this dark world before walking away in 1994, largely due to the exhaustion of hate and the unconditional kindness he experienced from the very people he was taught to despise, including a Black coworker he had who told him, "I know that's not who you are." Today, Arno is the author of multiple books, including My Life After Hate, and co-author of The Gift of Our Wounds, which is a book born from his friendship with Pardeep Singh Kaleka, whose father was murdered in the 2012 Oak Creek Sikh temple shooting carried out by a white supremacist Arno had helped radicalize years earlier through his music and ideology. That friendship and their joint work became the foundation of something called Serve to Unite, which is an organization that engages young people through service and mentorship. He's also a co-founder of Parents for Peace and works with Light Upon Light and Beyond Barriers USA, different organizations where he travels the world speaking to students, law enforcement officials, and faith communities. You can understand why I was so eager to chat with Arno, and we really cover a lot of terrain in this episode. You'll get to learn about Arno's story, the mechanics of radicalization, and what he makes of the world today. There is an openness about Arno that makes our conversation sound like two longtime friends, even though that was really the first time I ever met him in person. One of the most touching parts of his story for me was his ability to step up for his daughter and his sincere desire to repair and make right for the damage he has done. Seeing how he processed this dark, formative experience and turned it around to bring so much light and inspiration and aid to the world is nothing short of incredible. He is a wonderful ally to the Jewish people, a true Goy you will enjoy. Now let's get to the episode. Arno, hello and welcome to People Jew Want to Know podcast.
Thanks so much, Margarita. I'm delighted to be here.
This is such a fancy schmancy studio we're in.
Isn't it?
And it also kind of feels like a little bit of a therapist office, and I like it.
It does. So I had this dream.
Okay, well, please tell us about yourself. What do you do and how did you get there?
Sure. So it's always been difficult since I left information technology consulting to describe what I do as a position because there isn't really one. So I just kind of call myself a storyteller. I really believe, and this is really driven home by Yuval Noah Harari's book, Sapiens, that stories are the way that human beings define their relationship with the world. And looking back through my entire life, I've always been in love with storytelling, and I've always been a storyteller for good, bad, and ugly. And today I tell stories based on my lived experience that ideally inspire people to see themselves in others and to see others in themselves. Within that context, my storytelling is inspired by my past as a neo-Nazi skinhead from 1987 to 1994. I went public with my story in 2010, and since then I've been working in various efforts to counter hate in every form all around the world. I've had the incredible good fortune, literally travel around the world and meet people from every background you can imagine. And I still do a lot of kind of independent consulting with NGOs and government and law enforcement, really to counter violent extremist narratives and also to create social resilience that makes those narratives less likely to take hold. And my day job is that of an exit peer specialist at a really amazing org called Parents for Peace. Parents for Peace was founded actually by an Afro-American Baptist family from Memphis, Tennessee. And when their eldest son fell under the influence of a vehemently anti-Jewish Islamist narrative, he was planning on blowing up a synagogue. And fortunately, the logistics of that fell through. But unfortunately, his plan B was to shoot up a U.S. Army recruiting station, which he did. And he murdered a U.S. service member in the process, and he'll be in prison for the rest of his life. So after this happened, his father, Melvin, who passed away last year, and we all carry his memory with us as a blessing and as an inspiration in the work we do, and his sister, Monica, formed Parents for Peace as the resource they wish they would have had when they realized that Carlos was becoming radicalized. But as it was, they weren't aware of his plans for violence. So the police were like, yeah, if he's not doing anything violent, we can't do anything about it. His counselors in college had no idea of extremism or how to deal with it. And so Parents for Peace was formed to fill that gap. And since 2016, under the leadership of our brilliant executive director, Miriam Nadri Churchill, we've created a toll-free U.S. and Canada-wide helpline that anyone can call if they're concerned about a loved one falling under the influence of any sort of violent extremist narrative. We treat all of them, far left, far right, racial, religious, Antifa, what have you. And we basically coach those families to create an environment most conducive to lead that loved one to a better place. And as an exit peer specialist, I work directly with those radicalized individuals, in my case, usually of the neo-Nazi flavor, really just to find out what kind of underlying trauma is making these narratives seem appealing, and then address that trauma rather than like butt heads on the narratives. So in addition to doing the helpline work, which, by the way, we just launched a anti-Jewish hatred specific helpline called the Antisemitism Intervention and Recovery Project, where we focus on anti-Jewish hatred because we've noticed over the past 10 years that all of these various forms of violent extremist ideologies, which at the surface seem to be diametrically opposed to each other, they all converge on anti-Semitism. So seeing that as a foundation.
That's great.
Yeah, I know it's not.
We're popular. What can we say?
Great news. Why are you so obsessed with me?
Yeah.
It really makes sense, but I have a lot of ideas as to why that is, which I'm happy to talk about later. But as far as Parents for Peace goes, we have the new AIR hotline, we have our nationwide helpline, and then in both kind of spheres, we do training for people on the front lines who encounter extremism on a day-to-day basis, like law enforcement, K-12 educators, mental health professionals, and social workers.
Okay, a lot to unpack here.
Sure is.
I think what's not obvious to people on the surface is that there is kind of almost like an archetype of an extremist. And I want you to walk us through what that archetype is. For example, in your personal story, you got into extremism through the paradigm of music.
Mm-hmm.
What happens to people? How do they end up there? There's also like the paradigm of addiction, right?
Right.
So walk me through kind of how does an extremist come about?
I think the best way to answer that question is to first talk about what is effectively like an inoculation against becoming an extremist. And to me, as a Buddhist, I took a refuge vow in 2014. My refuge name is Nejung Chosam. It means renunciation Dharma bridge. I've been meditating since 2009. And what meditation does is it helps me create a sense of inner peace that for at least 10 minutes a day I'm connecting with, and I know is always there for me to draw upon. When you don't have a sense of inner peace and your life is in turmoil and you have trauma that you haven't been able to process in a healthy way, that's when you're at a high risk for radicalization. So to put it very simply, hurt people hurt people. And that's been kind of a tenet of mine for a long time. And I was actually doing a talk in a middle school and I'm all hurt people, yada, yada, yada. And this 12-year-old girl's like, Arno, not all hurt people. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's a really good point, actually. And I always make it every time I bring up that idea. As a Buddhist, like Buddhism 101 is if you're a human being, you're going to suffer. It's just part of our human experience. And as Buddhists, we believe that a lot of our suffering is caused by trying to avoid the inherent suffering in life, compounding it and cultivating it. So fortunately, when most people are suffering, they find a healthy way to process that suffering. It might be your great family. It might be faith. It might be activism, sports, music, art, whatever. But if you don't have a healthy way to process that suffering, there are all kinds of unhealthy answers just waiting to swoop in, one of which is violent extremist narratives of various sorts. So your typical archetype, I have an archetype I call Joe Pissed Off White Kid. And you heard of the dog whisperer? So a lot of times, Arno, what do you do? Like, I'm the asshole white kid whisperer. Like, I talk to the asshole white kids and I try to get them to not be assholes. Like, that's simply what I do. But the Joe Pissed Off White Kid archetype is typically a kid whose things aren't going great in life. They're mediocre or less. A lot of these kids come from really dysfunctional homes. They have what they call in the mental health field adverse childhood experiences that haven't been processed in a healthy way. And a lot of times they're bullied at school, or they're not popular in like real life interactions.
Was that you growing up? Would you
No.
say? Did it apply to you?
It was in ways, and in other ways it wasn't.
Okay.
For me, I grew up in a nice house in a nice neighborhood, suburb of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. My parents were together. They loved me very much. They let me know that all the time. As a matter of fact, when I was young, from my earliest memories, all the adults in my life would just fawn over me and be like, he's so wonderful. He's so gifted. He can do anything. Yay, Arnie. Like that was that was my environment as a kid. But our family was really living beyond our means in this nice house in a nice neighborhood. My parents did not bring in the income to float that kind of lifestyle. And my dad is an alcoholic. And when we were young, that put a lot of financial pressure on my mom to keep the household going. And at times she was working 2 jobs to pay the bills, and her relationship with my dad sucked. They were constantly fighting, and there was a lot of emotional stress in the house. My dad's an amazing man, and I love him dearly, and he's a hero of mine. But as a kid, like he was, and I followed in his footsteps, like partying was just like what you did, and you damn the consequences later. Well, my mom had to deal with all the consequences. And that was really hard for her. So this is all like looking back, kind of Monday morning psychoanalysis of myself. Mm-hmm. At the time, obviously, I'm not aware of any of this. But I think my theory is that while everybody's telling me how wonderful I am, and I'm hurting inside because I'm seeing my mom suffer and seeing my mother be stressed out, I just got this in my head. They're like, I'm not wonderful. I'm horrible. And if you don't believe me, watch what I do to this kid on the school bus. Watch what I do to this school. Watch what I do to this town. Watch what I do to this country. Like this antisocial backlash I had started out as a bully on the school bus. And again, my parents are doing the best they can, especially with a lot of the cases I have now and a lot of the other, in the counter-violent extremism space, I'm what's known as a former violent extremist. I have former friends of every stripe. One of my closest friends and colleagues who I work with every day is a former terrorist in Muslim clothing, as he calls it, named Mubin Shaikh. And most of the other formers I know have very adverse childhood experiences in their past. My childhood, in comparison to theirs, was pretty idyllic. Like, while I was still having a hard time because of some minor dysfunction in my house, like that was still the pain point that caused me to start lashing out at society. And again, that was my decision. I had agency. It's not on my dad or anybody or society or anybody else. I was the one who failed to engage with a host of healthy ways to process my suffering. I made the decision to start lashing out at other kids. I got a kick out of it, and I became addicted to it. I became addicted to antisocial behavior as a bully on the school bus. And when I do talks in middle schools, especially, I always use the analogy of a roller coaster with the kids. Like the first time you go on a roller coaster, it's a rush. Like you're going up that big hill and it's like, and you don't know when it's going to drop and all this tension's building, and then it drops and you're like, wow. It's this amazing adrenaline rush. If you go on the same roller coaster 10 times in a row, besides probably losing your lunch, it gets boring. You're like, okay, oh, here we go. Like, you're ready for it. It's not a thrill anymore. So you need to go find a bigger, faster roller coaster. I was constantly in that mode as a kid. Like, bullying kids on a school bus got boring, so I went from that to fights in the schoolyard, to breaking and entering, to vandalism. 14 years old, I started drinking myself. When I was 16, I was a full-blown alcoholic after drinking for 2 years. And I was constantly chasing this high of shocking people and repulsing people, and nothing shocks people and repulses people like a swastika. So that was my initial foray into it. And I always say, like, there's never going to be a good answer as to, like, well, why did you become a neo-Nazi skinhead? You're never going to have an answer like, oh, that makes sense, because none of it makes sense. For me, it was that addiction piece. I knew why swastikas were shocking and repulsive. I grew up with all kinds of Jewish friends. And in 6th grade, I went to all kinds of bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs, and I had a great time, and I was stoked I got invited. I was like one of the cool kids. And I loved those friends. They were awesome kids and awesome people, and I had zero, not that there's ever any justification, but I had zero bad experiences with Jewish people, zero bad experiences with Afro-American people or Latino or Asian. There wasn't a lot of them in my neighborhood, but the kids of that demographic who were, I was friends with, and I grew up with them. And so when I got into the neo-Nazi thing, there was this element. I knew I was not only turning my back on friends, but adopting a worldview that called for their extermination.
You fully understood that back then? You fully understood that that's what that meant? Or you think it didn't connect quite directly?
I think I did understand it at some kind of primal level, because when I talk about how I get out, the one word answer to that is exhaustion. And again, this is a factor of addiction as well. I'm an alcoholic as well as a recovering hate addict, so I'm very familiar with addiction in a conventional sense of alcoholism. And if you go to an AA meeting, everyone at that meeting is there because they're sick and tired of being sick and tired, because being sick and tired is the experience of addiction. And that was my experience of addiction to hate as well. And one of the things that was very exhausting, especially from the get-go, especially as I was taking those first steps into it, was that I was like, why am I now calling for all Jews to be killed when I grew up with all these Jewish friends? Like, why am I doing that? And I didn't have any answer to that. I knew what I was doing was wrong. I had this inner voice being like, what the hell's wrong with you? Sometimes as I'm like hitting someone, this voice is like, why are you hitting this guy? He never did anything to you. Like this, you don't even know this guy. And I didn't have the courage to even acknowledge that question, much less answer it. And that was a huge source of exhaustion. And again, that's part of the addiction. I know from my addiction to alcohol, and this is, both addictions have caused me to turn my back on my family as well. That's just a fact of addiction, is that it disconnects you from all the good things in your life. And sometimes even as it's happening, you get a feeling that this is happening, but it all takes a back seat to chasing that high.
Talk about what it took for you to stop being a mega hater, for lack of a better word. Your daughter played a huge part in that.
Absolutely. Yeah, my daughter was conceived by her mother and I because we felt that as white people, it was our duty to have white children. So my daughter was willfully conceived when I was 21 years old. And it's interesting to me because this is like a hallmark of many violent extremist narratives. But in white nationalism, the whole spiel is like, when people say, why do you hate people? And I would say, I hate because I love the white race. I love the white race so much. And when you love something and it's threatened, you're going to hate whatever threatens that thing that you love. I tried to like pitch it as this very natural, like, instinct,
almost like biological.
Exactly. Yeah. Ironically, I pitched it as a parent would talk about their child. Obviously, if you have a child, you're going to hate anything that threatens that child. Well, for all that rhetoric, I was a horrible white son to my white parents. I was a horrible brother to my white brother. I was a horrible boyfriend to my white girlfriend, and I was a horrible father to my white child. So that's all it was. It was a bunch of talk that I was absolutely not walking. And to that point, when my daughter was a week old, my younger brother and I went out, got in this huge bar fight. I came home at 3 a.m, stinking drunk, covered in somebody else's blood. And my daughter's mother is like, "You're a piece of garbage. What the hell's wrong with you? Like, you're supposed to be a dad now and you're still acting like this. Like, you're garbage." And I wouldn't have anything to say in my defense if I was stone cold sober, but as drunk as I was, the only thing I could think of to do was to grab this EK combat dagger, which was the closest weapon, and I just about took my left hand off with it. I tried to kill myself. And this was a week after my daughter was born. So like, oh, I love the white race so much. But when faced with the idea of being remotely accountable as a man and as a father, all I can say is to try to take my own life. Like that's how miserable it is. That's how exhausting that is. Now that was after a space of 7 years. I spent 7 years addicted to hate. And like other addictions, there's a cycle to it. When I started drinking and when I was 14 years old, it was me and some headbanger friend of mine in a graveyard, like listening to Slayer on a boombox. I had like 3-4 beers and passed out. When I quit drinking 20 years later at age 34, I would be sitting in the garage by myself with a case of beer, chain smoking, drinking, and listening to the same Slayer tape on the same different boombox. But it illustrates this cycle of addiction where it starts out, it's, ooh, this is fun, this is a rush, it's a party, it's a thrill, I'm cool. And then at the end of that cycle, you're like, this is pathetic. Like I'm garbage, but I can't do without this thing.
And it's also something you have to choose.
Yeah.
You chose that for yourself on
absolutely.
that day.
Absolutely.
And that's the hard part is at this time when there's so much extremism, you're seeing people who are not ready to choose what they know in their heart is the right choice, because that's the hard choice. Actually, I want to tell you about, I had an opportunity to interview a Jewish bank robber who wears a disguise when he does interviews, because he was a bank robber in Israel. He robbed very many banks successfully until he got caught, and he served in Israeli prison. The interesting thing about him is, as a Jewish man, he came from the United States, and he served in the IDF, where he staged a coup. So he also served in the Israeli army prison, which is even worse than regular Israeli prison, because it's just considered such a disrespectful thing to do,
It was a court
to
martial.
disobey orders, that they make Israeli army prison worse than like regular prison, quote unquote. And so it's very clear, if you kind of follow his journey, that he wanted to prove something to somebody. He wanted to be pissed off at somebody. And so no matter what environment he was in, he found a way to do it. And so the deal that his lawyers got for him was, once he was released from Israeli prison, he is able to go back to the United States with a clean record as a reformed man, so long as he doesn't go back to Israeli belief or something like that. And it's a very amazing story. And I actually ran into him very recently in person at an event. And I spoke to him and I asked him, because he had written a book and I read his book. I was like, do you regret what you did? And he said no. He said no. He is a proud Jewish Zionist dude who robbed old ladies who work at the bank at gunpoint. Granted, it was a fake gun. It was like a model gun.
That's
he said it worked just as well.
Take some chutzpah.
Right. And he said no.
Wow.
I'm like, dude, lie. You know, like, what are you doing? And I just couldn't look at him the same way again. He's been to prison twice.
I get that question a lot, and it's a common rhetorical question. Like, if you had to do it all over, like, would you do it the same? And for me, like, I've done a lot of harm.
But the difference is you regret what you did. And that's the true essence of change, is being able to recognize and feel that deep regret, because that is the mechanism that drives you to repair.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what's missing. And I just thought you would like, it's a great thing to tell you because you understand intimately how these people operate. I'm also curious to know what's like the latest landscape of white nationalism and neo-Nazis. Like, what's their current situation? Obviously, it's been years since you were in that community, but you still talk to people who are in need of support.
Yeah.
What were these buddies that you had? You know, what are they up to these days?
Well, the landscape has certainly changed drastically over the past 30 years. And obviously the first glaring thing that's changed is the internet. I'm of this rare generation where literally about half of my life there was no internet and the other half there is. And now I can't imagine functioning without constant internet access like everybody else. But it's interesting because some things are exactly the same. The white nationalist narrative is that there's this Jewish plot to kill all the white people on the planet Earth, and it's been going on for thousands of years. And if we don't fight back against it, the Jews are going to kill all the white people. As ridiculous as that should sound to any thinking person, that's the core tenet of white nationalism. And white nationalists today spout the same nonsense, the exact same nonsense. Another thing that is the same is when I was talking to Joe Pissed Off White Kid 30 years ago, and it's my job now to talk to Joe Pissed Off White Kid. One of the most common gripes is they don't have a girlfriend. 30 years ago, Joe Pissed Off White Kid didn't have a girlfriend either. Now they have even less girlfriends and even less connection with women and with any kind of romantic relationships. Nowadays, when I'm talking to Joe Pissed Off White Kid, I'm like, well, Joe, you know, chicks dig hygiene. So, like, how about showering every day? Get yourself some dental floss. Like, get in the gym, study, like, learn how to dance. Like, do things that would make yourself more attractive to someone of the opposite sex rather than just lamenting the fact that girls don't like you. Like, do something about it. You have agency to do this. While that's the right answer, it's not an easy answer. You don't flip a switch and all those things happen. Like, you have to start from day one and say, I'm going to dedicate myself to being healthy and clean and kind and nice and try to be someone who's pleasant that other people will like. That's not easy to do. So 30 years ago, I'd be like, Joe, you know why you don't have a girlfriend? Is because the Jews, back then I'd say Michael Jordan.
You don't have a girlfriend, it's because the Jews.
Oh, absolutely.
Full sentence.
It's absolutely because of the Jews. Back then I would have said Michael Jordan. Now I'd say LeBron or whatever. You know, as the times change, pick the most famous black athlete there is. And be like, the Jews put these savages on the billboards and magazine ads and newspaper ads to corrupt the mind of white women to make them think that they're the ideal man and you're not. And that's why you don't have a girlfriend, Joe. And as ridiculous as that is, it's music to Joe's ears because he doesn't have to do anything now. All he has to do is like hate Jews and blame them. He doesn't have to do any work or look in the mirror, which is hard for anybody to do, much less a teenage kid with adverse childhood experiences in a dysfunctional home. He can just okay, case closed. It's a Jew's fault. And the insidious thing is by telling Joe that and convincing him that, I'm actually dooming him to not only not having a girlfriend, but having a miserable dumpster fire failure of a life. Because as you blame Jews or anybody else for what's wrong in your life, you're casting away your own agency to do the real work to solve those problems. And it continues to spiral downward.
I'll actually add that that is a phenomenon that happens, I think, on irrespective of political eye, like in any extremist movement.
Oh, totally.
If you think about like this concept of white privilege,
Yeah.
I will never have a chance at life because I wasn't born white.
Right.
The flip is also working in the same way. How does this all, regardless, like converge on anti-Semitism? You mentioned that earlier, that everything comes back to anti-Semitism. What is going on?
First of all, I think a prime driver of anti-Jewish hatred throughout the ages, and I use that term anti-Jewish hatred because anti-Semitism, the word was coined by a German who hated Jews in the mid-1800s. And he erroneously said that Jews were Semites, like using this as some kind of racial category. And that kind of defines an era of Jew hatred. If you look at throughout history, like after the advent of Christianity, much of the hatred of Jews was saying, well, Jews killed Christ. And that was predominantly the driver of anti-Jewish hatred up until the mid-1800s, when society started becoming less religious, more scientific. So now you have this German guy, I forget his name, in the mid-1800s, who was like, actually, Jews are a filthy, non-Aryan race, and that's why they're impure, and that's why we have to hate them and be rid of them. And today, the modern form of anti-Jewish hatred is anti-Zionism. To say Jews actually are white, and now they're white colonizers and settlers, and they are the living embodiment of everything we deem wrong with the world in colonization and settling and apartheiding and genociding and what have you, whatever libel you want to smear Jewish people with. That's the latest manifestation of anti-Jewish hatred. But I think running throughout this is a thread of, and it's bizarre and it's terrifying really, but it's also, to me, it's kind of inspiring in that despite thousands of years of the worst, most intense persecution and oppression that any minority group on this planet has ever faced, Jews not only survive, but they thrive. An outside observer would be like, there must be something fishy going on because these people should have been crushed 1,000 years ago, but somehow they're not. What kind of shady thing are they doing to not be crushed by all this? And it's ironic and it's stupid because at the same time they're admitting this persecution at the same time they deny it, if they're thinking that way. And that's part of the mental gymnastics that anti-Jewish hatred, along with most forms of like ethnic hatred, require. But I think that jealousy and that envy of like, why are Jews still thriving after everything that's been done to them? And when I look at that in my own failure of a life, if I'm not doing well, now I'm like, okay, well, these people survived the Holocaust and yet they still control the banks and the media somehow, like, and I can't get a job. I can't get a girlfriend. Wow, I hate Jews. Like, how dare they? And again, this doesn't make sense from an objective analysis. It doesn't make sense from a spiritual analysis. But when someone is suffering, it makes a lot of sense. And if we look back through history, times of great suffering are also the times of the greatest anti-Jewish hatred. Whether you're talking about the Black Plague, which Jews are blamed for, or famines throughout history, or natural disasters, the economic disaster that happened in Germany after World War I, the economic, I wouldn't say disaster, but we're in a real edgy time economically now throughout the world. It have been since COVID, and COVID was even blamed on Jews as well. So when society's not doing well, it kind of reverts to this, wow, we're not doing well. Why are Jews still doing well?
It's a form of sense making.
Yeah, exactly.
It's an explanatory effect. Do you think there's anything that Jews should be aware of? Like, is there anything Jews should do? Or do you think this is really a problem left to the non-Jews?
I'd say first and foremost, anti-Jewish hatred is a non-Jewish problem. It's obviously it's a problem for Jewish people who are subject to it, for sure. It's a problem that like every shul on this planet has to have a SWAT team every Friday night, or when kids are going to school. Like, that's a huge problem that Jews are dealing with, but it shouldn't be their problem. Like, this problem originates in the people who, whether they admit it or not, make the decision to hate Jews. So it's the responsibility and the accountability is on non-Jews. And non-Jews need to understand that, as we've been talking about, hating Jews or anybody else and constructing your worldview around that hate is a recipe for disaster in your own life. And the more people in our society whose lives are disasters, the worse things get for everybody, no matter how much you got your stuff together. Like, if all your neighbors are coming unglued and you got to watch your stuff's getting stolen or you're being attacked, like it literally erodes all of society. Not to mention that throughout history, every time a anti-Jewish hatred has taken place institutionally, like at a government level, whether you're talking about the USSR or Nazi Germany or the IRGC after they hijacked Iran, like all of those societies are miserable places to live. Like everybody suffers once this anti-Jewish hatred takes root in the government level of the society. So that's a reason why everyone in our society needs to be very aware and very committed to not just diminishing, but ideally ending anti-Jewish hatred across the board.
Yeah, you're framing it as like it's in your best interest. That
Oh,
there's
yeah.
not anti-Jewish.
Absolutely.
That makes sense.
The founding family of Parents for Peace. This is an Afro-American Baptist family in Memphis, Tennessee that had a very successful tour business, taking people to Graceland and to Beale Street and all kinds of stuff like that. I'm sure they knew Jewish people. I know Melvin and Monica had Jewish friends like that, but there wasn't a whole lot of interaction between them and Jews. It's an example of how you can have a family that's not Jewish. And in many of our cases, like these are families like out in the sticks where there's probably not a Jew within 50, 100 miles of them, but they are devastated by anti-Semitism. The Free Press just released a story about one of our cases where my aforementioned colleague Mubin Shaikh was helping a 14-year-old kid who fell under the influence of a Jew-hating Islamist narrative and threatened to stab some kid at school and made all these other terrorist threats. And now the FBI is kicking down the door. So here is a non-Jewish family and didn't have any interactions with Jews, but they have been devastated by their son falling under the influence of this really toxic idea.
I'm interested to see how the next few years develop. Obviously, this is ever evolving and it fluctuates where it comes from. It's definitely a troubling time, I think, for non-Jews. As much as it is a troubling time for Jews, really non-Jews have it just as bad, if not worse in some cases. As part of this Goy You Will Enjoy segment, you get to ask me, a Jew, any question that you may have about Jewish life. You're already pretty well learned.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if there's anything, and it can be as taboo or non-PC, literally whatever you want, you can ask.
All right. Yeah, I mean, first I have to qualify myself. Like, I'm super inspired by Judaism. Part of my Buddhist practice is instead of being intimidated by other spiritualities, I'm really inspired by it. And so I'm inspired by Islam and Christianity, but especially Judaism. I've been immensely inspired by learning from Holocaust survivors and now October 7th survivors, like people who had every right to hate and instead choose not to. Like that really blows my mind. And it's helped me after a relapse into hate after October 7th when I hated Hamas. All this leading up to say that I hang out with a lot of Jews. I go to a lot of Shabbat dinners. Okay, this is my question then. Where in New York has better pastrami than Pastrami Queen?
This is like this is not a fair question. This is so easy.
I didn't have breakfast, so I'm starving, and I know Pastrami Queen's just up the street, really, and that's where I'm headed after this. Unless,
okay, perfect.
Unless you have a better recommendation for me.
No, I think Pastrami Queen is a great choice.
Okay.
I think Katz is a classic.
Yeah.
Or Barney Greengrass, maybe?
I've yet to do Barney.
I also haven't been, so maybe that'll be...
Okay.
I was ready for you to, ask, what is your greatest fear, as a Jewish person? Something, so profound.
I'm sorry I did everything deeper than that. I guess my stomach is leading that answer. But it's important to me to not to, reify or deify Jewish people, because it's easy once you start to get to know Jews and you spend a lot of time with them and you study Judaism and you're really like, wow, this is really amazing. It's an amazing faith. It's so beautiful. It's so inspirational. And the Jewish people that I know and love are not just good people. They're some of the best people I've ever met in my life. And just for fairness sake and also for accuracy's sake, I have to make the point, like, okay, yeah, there's also Jews have their share of royal scumbags, just like anybody else.
Yep,
like it's
exactly.
it's you never want to get like, Jews are the best, Jews don't do anything wrong, Jews don't hate anybody. It's like, no, of course there's like Ben Gavir is the bad guy in Herzl's old Newland book. Like it's that's really I love about Jews and Judaism, and it's a reason why authoritarian governments have always kind of went after Jews first, I believe, is because inherent to Judaism is beyond a love. I would say, like, just you're wired for debate and for dialogue
and democracy.
Like,
have you met Dara Horn?
I've not.
You would love her.
Yeah, I'm sure I would.
Love her.
I'm sure I would.
Okay. Well, tell me, how can people connect with you and keep up with your work?
First and foremost, parentsforpeace.org with the number 4. That has all the information about our organization, has a lot of great free resources. I should also mention that our helpline service is completely pro bono. We're funded by public and private grants and foundations, so we provide our services to anybody who needs them at no cost. That's the number one thing that people should be looking out for. Beyond that, on LinkedIn and Instagram, which is really the only, and much more so Instagram, the only social media I use, I'm at Arno Michaelis.
Thank you so much for doing this. I'm left with more questions than answers, honestly. There's a lot to think about. I am so grateful to have the chance to meet you.
Likewise.
There's something really amazing in your journey and your ability to turn everything around. It's never too late. It's never too late to make the right choice.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Margarita.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, please go ahead and rate us 5 stars. Be the first to hear our episodes by subscribing to People You Want to Know wherever you get your podcasts. And for exclusive content, follow us on Instagram at People You Want to Know.